Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we've hit the top, but with no plans to stop. For me, it doesn't even come close. I mean, there's no contest. My favorite video game of all time is EarthBound for the Super Nintendo. Personally, I think it's as close to perfection as a video game RPG can get, and it absolutely captures the feeling of being a child. In fact, if I were to point to a piece of entertainment media and say that right there, that's my childhood, it would be EarthBound. This game is actually called Mother 2, and yes, it's a sequel. Similar to how different Final Fantasy games follow different characters and settings, but usually include similar gameplay elements. EarthBound here is the follow-up to a very similar game originally released on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The original Mother game on NES, recently localized in North America as EarthBound Beginnings, acts as a blueprint for what we would eventually get with EarthBound. But let's back up a bit. The Mother series of video games is the brainchild of famous Japanese personality Shigesato Itoi. In the West, Itoi may be best known as the creator of the Mother games, but in Japan, he's primarily known as a copywriter, but he's done a little bit of everything. He's acted as judge on Iron Chef, voiced the father character in My Neighbor Totoro, and even tried his hand at live-action acting in the 2010 Japanese film Norwegian Wood. But during the 1980s, he made his living writing copy for advertisements, and that's how he found himself in the offices of Nintendo. While visiting one day, he decided to pitch a game idea he had directly to legendary designer and father of Mario, Shigeru Miyamoto. Even though his concept was initially shot down, that core idea of mixing together first-person RPG battles with a contemporary setting featuring children instead of the typical sword and sorcery elements must have piqued Miyamoto's interest. As the story goes, when the two next met, Miyamoto decided to show Itoi an example of planning documentation for a video game to illustrate how much work is actually involved. Itoi would continue to workshop the idea and expand it beyond the original concept. He wanted to prove to Miyamoto that he was serious, and that this idea could be something worth pursuing for Nintendo. Eventually, Miyamoto was impressed enough to give Itoi a chance. EarthBound is a great name for this game, but there's also something strangely endearing about the story behind the original title, Mother. When thinking about his game idea, Itoi thought it might appeal to women instead of men, due to its more emotional story and child protagonists. Gone are the brave knights and dragons to fight, sort of, there is one dragon much later, but here it's been replaced by adorable psychic kids who fight strange townfolk and eventually, aliens. Whatever the case, the name itself is borrowed from the John Lennon song of the same name. But honestly, I think both names fit these games perfectly. If you really think about it, what's the ultimate goal of these games? To save humankind from aliens who are bound for Earth, or Earthbound. And what are you trying to protect again? The Earth, or as some might say, Mother Earth. See what I mean? The sad thing about the origins of that first NES game is that we almost saw it released in North America back in 1991. Apparently, it was fully translated, localized, and ready to go with the same name we got for the Super Nintendo sequel, EarthBound. Interestingly, written as 2 words this time. But Nintendo of America canceled it at the last minute. But why? If all the work was already done, complete with a map and all these other materials, why pull the plug? Well, 2 words. Super Nintendo. The original Mother game released in Japan during the second half of the Nintendo Famicom's lifespan, and by the time everything was ready to go for release in North America, it sounds like Nintendo thought about how much it would cost to market a game in a genre that had already been difficult to push through into North America, the RPG or role-playing game. If we look at a similar situation with Dragon Quest, localized into English at the time as Dragon Warrior, it did not catch on over here when compared to its massive popularity in Japan. Nintendo even had to resort to giving the first game away with subscriptions to Nintendo Power. So it's little wonder why they were hesitant to give Mother, another slower, grindy RPG, a fighting chance. So all the work was locked away in a drawer until sometime in the early 2000s when a prototype cartridge found its way to collectors and eventually the internet. And that was how many fans hip to the emulation scene at the time first experienced Mother, now known as EarthBound Beginnings. I love this game. Okay, sure, it's absolutely a product of its time, and like many other NES RPGs, you do have to sit through an overwhelming enemy encounter rate and grind out those levels, but the simple story combined with the engaging gameplay and that stellar soundtrack makes the whole experience well worth it. And I mean, wow, the soundtrack for this game and the whole series is some of the best music ever written. And I'm not speaking in hyperbole here. Speaking of the rest of the series, a lot of what I love about its Super Nintendo sequel was originally established here. Exploring the contemporary setting as a little psychic boy, using baseball bats and yo-yos to fight enemies, calling your dad on the telephone to save your game, accessing your money using a debit card to buy everything you need for your journey, sleeping in hotels to regain your hit points and psychic points, and so much more. It all started here. I would almost recommend this game to anyone interested in this series, but I would always say play EarthBound first, simply because EarthBound Beginnings is hard. And I mean hard. The early game and the late game both require a lot of grinding if you hope to stand a chance. It's very easy to die in this one, so if you do decide to give it a try, save often. And as can be expected with an early RPG, enemy encounters are random, and like I mentioned earlier, that encounter rate can be unreasonable at times. In fact, Shigesato Itoi has since gone on record to confess that when programming the enemy encounter rate and difficulty during the last few areas of the game, they were kind of like, well, whatever. Despite all that, the original game is worth playing and deserves its place in gaming history. Yes, the story is much simpler, but the incredible music combined with excellent sound design make this an old school RPG that's super fun to play. And it's playable today via Nintendo Switch Online. Since the original NES game was shelved in order to pave the way for its Super Nintendo sequel, why not keep the name EarthBound? And since this game was released in 1994, Nintendo of America had a surefire advertising strategy they knew would win. Focus on how gross the game is! For all the ones who didn't live through it, the early to mid-90s was arguably the gross-out era. From TV shows like Ren and Stimpy and Beavis and Butthead, to other video games at the time like Boogerman, and just an overall cultural obsession with things like GAC and slime TV shows, it sort of makes sense why they decided to market EarthBound from this angle. Keep in mind, this was 2 years before Final Fantasy VII hit the PlayStation in 1997 and brought RPGs to the North American mainstream. Sure, Final Fantasy 4 and 6, famously altered to 2 and 3, had hit the SNES, and Chrono Trigger was a few months old, but Super Mario RPG was still a year away, and I think it's fair to say video game RPGs were still mostly struggling over here. So yeah, let's make EarthBound stand out from the crowd by focusing on how gross and smelly it is. Like those scratch and sniff cards in Nintendo Power, or those ads that really tried to show off how much this game stinks. I don't know if this ridiculous ad campaign paid off, but it doesn't really matter, since this is not the only thing EarthBound had going against it. When it released in 1995, it's important to understand this was a time period in entertainment when many critics and audiences had become obsessed over graphics. CD-based home consoles had started hitting the video game market starting in 1993 with the Sega CD add-on for the Genesis and the Panasonic 3DO, among others. And when EarthBound hit the scene, the Sony PlayStation was only a few months away. Combine that with the fact that the game was more expensive than your typical Super Nintendo game, since Nintendo shipped the game in a giant box so it could fit the entire game's walkthrough guide in there. I mean, that guide is awesome, but regardless, I think audiences in 1995 unfairly judged EarthBound based on its limited pixel art. Now, I've always thought this game looked amazing. Sure, there's limited character animations, but colors pop, and the realistic depictions of small-town North America easily made it stand out from an oversaturated market focused on fantasy and science fiction settings. I still think a contemporary video game setting is such a breath of fresh air. Now don't get me wrong, I love fantasy and sci-fi settings, and EarthBound eventually dips its toes into both. But the way this game begins is truly special. You play a kid who's awoken in the middle of the night to a strange noise. You go downstairs, talk to your mom, and eventually decide to take your dog out to find out what happened. This is such a unique way to kick things off. Most games at the time wanted to take you out of your daily life and transport you to a wild new world, but EarthBound opens with a very strong sense of familiarity, and that has always stuck with me. These days, when I play RPGs, or any game that lets you name the characters, I usually stick with the given names, unless the character is supposed to be you. But EarthBound begged you to make it personal. You are the main character, so he should share your name. I had a dog, so I put her in the game too. The girl I had a crush on at the time, 2 of my closest friends, my favorite food and thing. All of this customization were ways to draw you into the world, and at the time, this level of input was kind of unheard of, at least on the Super Nintendo. But more importantly, EarthBound, just like the NES game that came before, is so much fun to play. I honestly don't know how many times I've run through this game, but it's incredible every single time. The soundtrack is one of the all-time greats, but the sound design is where this game knocks it out of the park. It's strangely pleasing to simply open up and navigate the menus with the little sound effects. Same with the battles. The crunchy sounds when you hit the enemy, and the incredibly satisfying smash sound when you land a critical hit. The rolling health and PP meter is also a touch of genius, and something wholly unique for this game, in that you can actually survive a killing blow if you manage to heal up or defeat the enemies before your health drops to 0. It adds a lot of controller gripping tension to the battles. Truly, first-person turn-based battles have never been this good. And one of the best things about EarthBound's battle system? If the game sees that you're so strong that there's a high chance of winning the battle in the first round, there's a possibility you'll get to win, pick up the experience and any items dropped, and move on without ever entering the combat scene. Other RPGs would go on to borrow this mechanic, but every RPG should. It's absolutely a worthwhile time saver. Outside of battling, like any other good RPG, there's lots of excitement to be had just exploring the setting. While many NPCs in many RPGs can usually be ignored, in EarthBound, you'll want to track down every last weird person in this world just to see what kind of outrageous things they say. And a lot of EarthBound's unique personality comes from English localizer Marcus Lindblom, who was pretty much given full reign to make EarthBound's text as weird as he wanted, as long as he stayed within the confines of the original Japanese intention. It's worth noting that translating from any language to another is a type of balancing act, and usually includes making tough decisions about how to convey various concepts or cultural references in a way that makes sense in the new language. No translation is ever perfect, but EarthBound's has been given tons of praise over the years, and the oddball humor is one of the many reasons why the game is still enjoyable to this day. And while you're laughing along with the game's script, you'll constantly find yourself exploring new towns, meeting strange new people, and experiencing things wholly unique to EarthBound. The plot itself is quite simple, in that you're meant to gather a group of friends to defeat an evil alien from the future and his strange allies, but it's all about the journey to get there. You'll go from town to town, taking down gangs, cultists, zombies, dinosaurs, robots, paintings, and so much more. Seriously, this game has a little bit of everything. EarthBound is one of those rare cult games that eventually did find its audience, and it's since exploded into popularity. It would also go on to inspire many gamers, and more importantly, game developers. Toby Fox, best known for Undertale and Deltarune, originally got his start designing games with a Halloween-themed mod for EarthBound. There are also 2 different documentaries about this game's legacy and what it's come to represent for fans. I think EarthBound is a game that will always inspire people, and that's pretty special. But this wasn't always the case. There are tons of people out there who only learned about EarthBound's existence thanks to Ness's appearance as a playable fighter in Super Smash Bros. And its sequels. And don't even get me started on Nintendo's decision to include Lucas without ever localizing the game he came from. A few years after EarthBound's 1995 release, news would soon surface about a new game for the Nintendo 64 called EarthBound 64. For the next few years, this game would unfortunately be stuck in development and never see release. Shigesato Itoi has retroactively admitted that his team severely struggled with developing a 3D entry in the series, and he had all but moved on from the project. Until one day, the late Satoru Iwata, who famously supported EarthBound's development, told Itoi to make the new game however he wanted. And with the new Game Boy Advance handheld that was technologically similar to the Super Nintendo, Itoi decided to develop the new game in a style similar to the last one. Mother 3, or EarthBound 2, would never see an official release from Nintendo, and nobody really knows why. Whether it was due to the financial failure of EarthBound or some rumored copyright issues over music, I guess we'll never know. Unlike the NES and Super NES games, Mother 3 is something completely different. One of the main characters is a little boy, but you also control several other characters along the way. Story-wise, this one contains a lot more drama and emotional moments along with the more humorous ones. While I will always prefer EarthBound, this game is still amazing, and I can totally see why some people prefer it to EarthBound. The combat system includes a rhythm component, keeping you more involved in the battles, and the story is arguably a lot more interesting, with more meaningful dialogue. You actually see these characters go through emotional arcs and grow throughout the story. Compared to the simplicity of EarthBound, this one is more in-depth. And if this brief description even slightly piqued your interest, it's easy enough to play it yourself. A fan translation would find its way online, and Clyde Mandelin, the man behind it, even offered it to Nintendo for free. But nothing official ever happened. Except for all those memes.
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3!
How about this instead?
Funny at first, but still painful. And frustratingly, Mother 3 was recently announced as a playable title for Nintendo Switch Online, but only in Japan. You know, just thinking about EarthBound makes me want to drop everything I'm doing just to play it again. That's the power this game has over me, and that's how much I love it. To me, it's a masterpiece. And thankfully, you don't need to take out a loan to play it for yourself these days, since, unlike Mother 3, this one is available on Nintendo Switch Online. But what about you? Have you ever played EarthBound or Mother 3? What are some of your favorite video game RPGs? Tell me all about it down in the comments below, and until next time, you know, one of my favorite... It's picture time. Ready? Say, Fuzzy Pickles! Hey, hope you're having a super awesome day. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you real soon.